The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We share some insights, we make some connections, and hopefully we have a bit of fun as we study the words of the men and women God has called to direct His church in these, the latter days. I'm Melissa Fugaza, and I am here with our special guest, Jennifer Roach. And this is episode 9, where we're talking about Elder Kearon's talk and Elder Aidukaitis' talk. So, Jennifer Roach, you are a guest on this first time on our podcast. We are so excited to have you. Welcome. Thank you for joining.
Here.
Yay, we're so excited. Could you do us a favor and just introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about?
Yep. My name is Jennifer Roach. I am married. My husband and I live in Seattle. Our son is 21. He lives in Utah, going to school down there. I am a convert to the church. I got baptized 3.5 years ago. Before my baptism, I was in the regular, the normal Christian world. I was ordained as a pastor in another Christian church, and every week gave sermons and did weddings and did all the stuff that you do in a church. I read the Book of Mormon. It flipped my life upside down. I had to resign from that church. And it's one of the best things I ever did.
My goodness, thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you about not only these talks, but just kind of your experience as being a new-ish member of the church and your impressions. So I am going to start off with my very first question is, what was your first impression of General Conference as a new member?
So my first General Conference experience, I think, is radically different than anyone else's. And they should not use my experience as any kind of template for what it might be like for them.
Ooh, I'm excited now.
The very first time I went, or the very first time I listened to the entire thing, I actually got to go in person. My bishop had given me a couple of 2 tickets to 2 different sessions, and off I drove to Utah to go listen to the conference. And I was by myself, but met up with a girl from our ward who had told me, she's like, my husband and I are going to be there, and maybe we can sit together or something. And I was like, great, we'll meet up. It turned out her dad is in the 70. He has given conference talks, Elder Koch. He made it so that I got some extra tickets. I ended up getting a ticket to every single session.
So cool.
I got to sit in the 5th row for one of these. Who gets to do that?
That's amazing.
It was so much fun for me. Since then, and mostly because of COVID, but also just practical reasons, I've always watched at home like everybody else in my pajamas. And that's a lovely experience too. It's a totally different thing to go in person because you're dressed up and you have to sit there and act like a normal adult human being and not run to the kitchen for cinnamon rolls every 5 minutes.
Right? Oh my gosh.
But my first time going was just a complete delight.
That's so amazing. I just love hearing about that because, yeah, as a member of the church, I've been a member of the church my entire life. Mm-hmm. And I have been blessed and honored to go in person as well, like you. Back in the day when we would actually go in the tabernacle and we'd have to go wait in line. Some people would even camp overnight and they'd line up at the temple square. And then they'd shove us. And I laugh about this experience now because we get in there. I mean, we drove from Arizona. So we drove from Arizona. We get there, we're waiting hours and hours, especially if it's, for some reason in Utah, for me, at least in my experience, the first weekend in April or the first weekend in October, it doesn't matter. It's cold, it's rainy, It's snowy. I don't know what it is. So you're in the cold, you're waiting in this long line. they get you into the tabernacle, and the tabernacle is made of a bunch of, I don't know if you've been in there, but a bunch of wooden pews.
Yeah.
So no cushioning. And they would shove us in there like sardines. I mean, we are just on the laps of strangers. It is just, you're shoved in there, and you get in there and conference gets started and it starts to warm up, because there's a lot of people in there. And then of course you get kind of drowsy. You're kind of like sleepy.
Yeah.
Many times I would just kind of found myself like, doing the head jerk, falling asleep thing. And I would sleep through part of it. So I'm with you on the wearing your pajamas at home. We call it pajama church at my house.
I love it.
It is like my favorite thing ever.
Love it.
So awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about your first experience. I think it's so cool. Now, you and I have chosen 2 talks to cover tonight because we're overachievers. The first one is from Elder Kearon. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Elder Kearon. And I love this talk because, as a matter of fact, right when I heard it, I texted Matthew Watkins, who's another host on this show, and I said, I don't care what I have to do, but I want to cover this talk. Whoever wants to do it with me. Mm-hmm. And it's called, let me pull up the title. He is risen with healing in his wings.
Yep.
Now, the cool thing about having you on as a guest, not only about the fact that you're awesome, but you're also a trained mental health professional. You're a mental health therapist. And I think this is amazing that we're covering this talk. So what were your first impressions? What are some thoughts that you had as you listened or watched this talk?
Yeah, so I actually had the same experience as you. As soon as it was over, I texted, I don't know, my 4 or 5 people and was like, were you listening? That was the best talk ever.
Yeah.
I am a mental health professional, but I'll be honest, my interest in this talk was way more personal than it was professional. Can I indulge you in a story?
Please do.
So when I first got interested in the church, it was because I was in a lawsuit against the church where I grew up, because that's where I had been sexually abused. Right. So I grew up in California, this big Baptist church, and they had a number of teenagers, kind of one youth pastor after another at this church were abusing kids. And I was one of them. And it was getting written about in the papers. And we were going to court. And one of the main reporter who was writing about this is a member of the church, which I knew, and it didn't really impact anything in terms of how it was covered. It's just something I knew about him. And one day, the church that I was suing, and won, by the way.
Good.
They announced that they were going to give a sermon as kind of a response to this lawsuit. And so I listened. They had it online. I listened. This reporter listened. And our plan was, let's talk on the phone a couple of days later and talk about their response. Was it a good response or wasn't it? And the pastor, he chose to talk about Moses. And basically his point was, well, Moses messed up, but he was still a good leader. So sometimes our leaders mess up, but they're still good leaders. Like, that was basically the gist of it. And so I was spitting mad. And I'm blah, 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 telling this reporter all the reasons I hate this sermon. And he says, I didn't like it either, but I have different reasons. I'm like, oh, really? Like, tell me. He says, well, I have scriptures about Moses that you don't have. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? No, you don't. He says, yeah, I do. So I'm pretty offended at his treatment of Moses, because that's not the Moses I know. And so I go into, you have to tell me what you're talking about. I mean, poor guy, he's a reporter. So imagine like a newsroom, even like you've seen on TV, and they're all bunched in there together, low walls, everybody can hear everybody. And he, at that moment, kind of gets shy and says, I'm at work. I can't talk to you about scripture right now. Like, okay, all right, that's fine. And we finished our conversation and hung up the phone. And I think really as soon as we hung up the phone, I texted him of like, can you please tell me what you're talking about with Moses? So I read the Book of Moses. I read the Pearl of Great Price. I was halfway through the Book of Mormon before I ever met the missionaries.
Oh, wow.
My entrance into the church really started because I was involved in this abuse lawsuit. So to hear a talk like this in General Conference, where he so specifically and directly addresses abuse, for me, it just felt like, this is so good. This is so wonderful. I am not naive enough to think that all abuse issues in the church have always been handled perfectly. I don't think that's true. I think there's plenty of things in the past that maybe could have been handled better. People did the best they could, and sometimes it wasn't great. And that now our church is at a place of saying, like, abuse is never the victim's fault. It is not tolerated. You will have to answer to God for this. Like, his whole talk just lays it all out in such a clear way. My experience, granted, I was taking this church to court, so I wasn't their favorite person, but I got this Baptist church where I grew up. I got lots and lots and lots of justification from them about why this happened to me, and it was probably my fault, and blah, blah. Like, they just sidestepped responsibility every single way that they could. So I love this talk because of how clearly it lays out where the responsibility for abuse lies.
That's amazing. I love General Conference talks, and one of the reasons why I came to be a person on this podcast is because of this exact moment. I got a totally different feel from this talk, but it's not wrong. Like, I just love how a talk is given.
Yeah.
And the Spirit just like spreads his amazingness over all of us, and we get what we need to hear from this talk. And it's just amazing to me. So I actually have depression and anxiety. I was not accurately diagnosed for a long time. Of course, I'm almost 44 years old. So when I was a younger kid, it wasn't very common for kids, unless we were, like hurting other people or hurting ourselves physically, that we could be properly diagnosed or whatever. But so I loved this talk a little bit from a mental health standpoint, because even though I very thankfully have never been sexually abused or physically abused, I have sustained some emotional abuse and some verbal abuse. And I'm sure everyone has in the world that we live in had some degree of abuse. And you're right. It was just so beautiful how this talk was just so clear. And he numerous times, I highlighted it, and I'm not going to bore us with every detail of when I highlighted it, but numerous times he kept going back to saying, it's not your fault. You are the survivor. It is not your fault. You don't need to repent because you are not responsible. And there was one part. Is there anything else you want to say about that as I've been talking about it, as I find this?
I'll tell you about an experience, and I'm going to obscure the details just a little bit because it's a person in my life.
Okay.
A friend who I knew growing up, her dad sexually abused her and one other sibling. And they were members of the church. When it all came to light, I want to be careful saying this because I know this has not been everybody's experience,
right,
with either our church or churches in general. But when it came to light, the decisions that were made were so in support of the two girls who were victims. Their safety, their mental health was prioritized over the perpetrator, who happens to be their dad. He had a membership council, and I don't know what it's called anymore, disfellowshipped. The fact that, at least today, this is a church where that has gotten right, at least sometimes, to me, that like reaffirms the truth of this church. And I know that there might be people listening who are like, no, I went through abuse and it was handled terribly. I get it. And I'm really sorry for that. And here's this talk trying to do better perhaps than has been done in the past. And I just love that.
Yeah. I like how I love how these issues are being brought to light on a worldwide forum. General conference, this is, I always say to my kids, general conference is not just for members of the church. General conference is for the world.
Yeah.
The prophet is not the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's the prophet of the world. And so I love when you have the leaders of the church get up on that podium in the conference center and they share messages like this. This is for the entire world. This is not just for our church members.
Yep.
But you're right. I too have known several people within the church that have had these issues. And I appreciate your point of view because I never really thought about it. But thankfully, a majority of the ones that I knew, the victim was treated very well. And it's sad that your situation was not so much like that.
Not at all. Not remotely.
And that's horrible, especially because as we look in this talk, so Elder Kearon is really great. He lays out, first he talks about the promises to covenant Israel, and that's really cool and spiritual, and about the challenge he took to read the scriptures and stuff. So I don't want to bypass that completely, but everyone go read that talk, watch that part of the talk because it's so good. But we're going with what we're talking about here. He said, to those that are surviving, one of my favorite parts is he says, we yearn for you to overcome the confusion, shame, and fear. And we long for you through Jesus Christ to conquer.
Yeah.
Oh, it just gave me the chills. We yearn for you and we long for you. I just think that was so beautiful.
I loved that. Like the mental health therapist part in me loves that, because when people come for therapy who have gone through any kind of abuse, there's often this despair of, this terrible thing happened to me and I'm never going to get over it. And I'm always going to be weird in relationships and I'm just broken for life.
Right.
And this talk makes it very clear that that does not have to be the case.
Yeah. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about a total mom fail moment that I had. So I have a 12-year-old daughter and she is a voracious reader. She's like me. She loves books. And I did a stupid thing and I got her this book. I'm a World War II nerd. I love World War II stories. Just, I don't know. It's a thing of mine. So I found this book and it was in the juvenile fiction section, right? And I read the back and I was like, oh yeah, this takes place World War II. It's about a girl kind of her age. This would be great. Kind of a little bit of realism because I homeschool my kids. So I'm like, okay, you got to kind of inject some reality here, not bubble wrap everything. So I hand her this book and she starts to read it. And after like 2 chapters, she stops and she comes to me and she says, Mom, I can't read that book. And I said, well, why not? And me just thinking, oh, she's bored or she doesn't like it. That's my first go-to. And she's like, I just can't read it. It's not good. I don't like it. And it doesn't make me feel good. And I was like, okay, that's a response I had not had before. So I said, okay, fine. We'll deal about it later. Told her to put the book away. Couple nights later, she had these horrible nightmares, and she's freaking out. And I went out on an errand during the day one day, and we had a little friend over, and her and my other daughter, who's 7, and the friend were out in the backyard playing. And we occasionally have planes passing over our house from a nearby local airport. And apparently, one of these planes was a little too close for comfort, kind of loud. And my oldest daughter panicked and she told all the girls, she said, everyone go inside the house.
Oh, wow.
And my husband was working inside and he was like, what's going on? And she finally confessed to him that she had read this scene in this book and it had given her nightmares for these past few days because we knew we were up. And she just wouldn't say what it was. So finally, my moment, I opened the book, right? And it's this book and I read it, and the second chapter in, these 2 darling girls that are the characters, they're like 11, 12 years old. They live in France. It's during the war, but France hasn't been occupied yet. They live kind of on a beach town. They're out walking the beach. They see this pregnant woman that they know. She comes walking up to them. Anyway, long story short, a German plane comes by, drops a bomb on the beach, blows the pregnant woman up. And there's graphic description of what that looks like. Yeah. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the 2 characters in it, 2 girls, okay, one of them's the main character of the story, clearly is totally traumatized, right? Her friend is catatonic.
Yeah.
She cannot speak. So she takes her friend home, takes her to her mom, tells her what happens. She's able to verbalize that. And then she goes home and she's able to verbalize with her family. So you come to find out as the story continues, the catatonic friend never recovers.
Oh,
she
wow.
never speaks again. And she sits in her house in the corner, can't function. Her mom has to nurse her, take care of her. I think she ends up passing away like 10 years later. And then the main character goes on to be this, it is based on true story, obviously, but the main character goes on to be this, healthy, thriving person, this human being, even after something that went through it. And it just reminded me of how truly important mental health is. These two girls went through the same experience.
Yeah.
Right? And just what was the support and all that stuff. And so as I was reading this conference talk, I did have the impression, because I do want to pick your brain a little bit as a professional, because how can we help people, our loved ones, how can we help them realize that they are loved, that they are not to blame, that, that God loves them. He doesn't see it as we think he sees it. He loves them no matter what. They're not despicable. They're not, what does it say? Elder Kearon said, despised in his eyes. Mm-hmm. We're never to be someone to be despised. So how can we help our loved ones see that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My experience with people who come as clients tends to be, if they've been through a trauma and they're not coping well, like obviously if they're coping well, I never meet them. The ones who aren't coping well, it usually goes in one of two directions. And it almost always is relational in some sense, where the trauma gets played out. People either become like clingers and they're so anxious, like they can never let their mom out of their sight. They're terrified. If dad's away on a business trip, he's going to die. They're just like, they just cling to their safe people, or they become kind of like a little turtle in its shell and so afraid of all the world that just retreating into themselves is the only thing that makes sense.
Okay.
Friends and family around them, understandably, get annoyed and confused by these behaviors and don't know what to do with them, right? And so sometimes, like if you're a clinger, sometimes people, especially if we're talking about kids, oh, get over it. Oh, everything's fine. And they'll tell them stuff like that. And it never works.
Right.
Even the person who goes in their little turtle shell, you are not going to convince them to come out. The best thing to do when your loved one they're living out their trauma in front of you is almost kind of have an attitude that says like, oh yeah, you get real nervous sometimes and you get afraid that I'm going to die, but here I am. Like almost a matter of factness of accepting this is where they are in their trauma. Like, okay, right. This is a trauma response. It's a common one. It's what people do. It only gets made worse if the friends and family treat them as if they are damaged because of it, instead of being able to say, like, gosh, I understand you have to go hide in your cave every time you get overwhelmed, and I'm here when you're ready to come out. Like you're dealing with your trauma. Your response is okay. I'm here for you and I love you. I accept you exactly as you are, whether you're clinging, whether you're hiding or acting out. And people act out in all kinds of weird ways.
Right.
And especially if we're talking about teenagers, not denying that the trauma is impacting them, but kind of just loving them anyway, accepting them exactly as they are.
I love that. I love the accepting exactly as they are, because that is how Jesus Christ is. Mm-hmm. He loves us exactly as we are. He knows exactly what we're going through. He knows our struggles, and he's walking with us every step of the way. It's not,
yep,
you have to get to this point before he meets you there. Thank you for that. I think that's really awesome. Okay, so before we move on to the next talk, I did also want to say, I love what we're talking about. Elder Kearon was saying, there's a section he says from victim to survivor to conqueror. Mm-hmm. And he said there's these things that people say, like, I could have prevented this.
Yeah.
God doesn't love me anymore. Nobody will ever love me. I am damaged beyond repair. The Savior's atonement applies to others, but not to me.
Yeah.
It just angers me.
Yeah. That's every traumatized client I see all day, every day. They 100% believe it's their fault. And here's my theory on why that happens to people. Think of like a 5-year-old kid, and his parents come in and tell him, Mom and Dad, we're going to get divorced. Dad's going to move out. Every single time, guaranteed, that little kid thinks it's his fault.
Right.
Right. And here's why. It's way easier for that kid even to imagine, oh, if I would have kept my room cleaner, if I would have just ate all my dinner, Dad wouldn't be moving out, because it's an illusion that you have some control. And admitting that you can actually be so betrayed and harmed by the very people who are supposed to be taking care of you, it's too much. It's too much for a child, and it's too much for most adults. Even, like, I have clients way older than me in their 60s and 70s, and we're processing their childhood abuse, and they still believe, oh, it was my fault. I did this, or I did that, or I said this, or I didn't tell, or I should have known, or whatever. And it's a defense mechanism that has protected them a little tiny bit from the pain that you can be betrayed that badly. Right. But
Right.
one of the parts I love in this talk is he makes a really clear line between, if you have been betrayed and hurt this badly, so has Jesus Christ. And he understands. And he did not deserve the betrayal that happened to him in the same way that you do not deserve the betrayal that happened to you. And untangling beliefs like that, I don't want to say therapy is the only way to do it. The people I see, it's the only way to do it because they're in therapy. There probably are some other ways that people do that, but often it takes visiting a professional where you can systematically go through those kinds of thoughts, deconstruct them, and replace them with something that's more true. If you know a thought is not based in reality and you choose to believe it anyway, we call that being delusional, right? So the process of taking someone, helping them see you believe something that isn't true and it's kind of delusional and it's messed up your camera on life. And let's fix the camera lens so that you actually can see things a little bit better. And that's a very long process. And every victim that I've ever known goes through that in cycles. They do really, really well for a while, and then they decompensate and drive their friends crazy. And then they do really well for a while, and around and around and around it goes. And it can be a lifelong process. It also can be, 6 solid months in therapy of like, let's really, really like put our heads down and work on this trauma and get your thinking clear, and things can radically improve.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. I think my final thought about mental health, I guess in general, since that was kind of what we pulled out of this talk, is it's so commonplace. Everybody has some level of something that they need to deal with, especially after what we went through with COVID in 2020. We all to have our lives, I shouldn't say your life, everyone's lives were turned upside down. The norm was totally changed. And I know we are now seeing things kind of coming unraveled because of that with a lot of people. And so I love his talk. I know it wasn't just specifically about like mental health, but I love how he really, that just kind of I feel like it soothed my soul listening to it. And that they knew that, yes, what we're going through, what we have gone through, whatever, we need to help. We need to help them feel like they're being heard. And
it's a fantastic talk. It's my favorite conference talk, really, of all the conference talks I've ever heard.
Wow. Amazing. I know. I loved it. I'm so glad. We mentioned before the podcast started that you and I hadn't even met you before, but I love how you and I are both like, we need to cover this talk in this podcast. It just resonated so much with us. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the next talk. This is from Elder Aidukaitis, who I have a little bit of a soft spot for. just a little bit of backstory. I served a mission in Brazil. My husband's actually Brazilian. I met him on my mission. I know,
Okay.
gasp, scandal. Elder Aidukaitis is Brazilian, but he has legit the best laugh ever. If you ever get a chance to hear him laugh, I think he might have even laughed in this talk.
Oh, that's hysterical.
It's just the best laugh. I don't know even how to describe it, and I'll do a total disservice if I try to imitate it. But so that's another reason to listen to it. If he laughs, you can hear it. But so I love the fact, and I hesitate to say this because I feel like everybody kind of walks away with a different idea of a recurring theme at conference. But for me, definitely if I were to pick the main topic of General Conference this past one, it would have been missionary work.
Yeah.
You felt that way too? Yeah. So how do you feel? So you being a convert to the church, I know you talked about how you came across the church, but how did it go with missionaries, like once they came into the picture and your lessons and things?
So I took lessons with the missionaries from 9 months, not because I was unsure. I knew pretty early on I wanted to join the church, but my family obviously had some concerns. And so my husband had asked me, like, give it at least until after January. So I said, okay. So everybody knew I was in lessons for a long time. And I wanted to take lessons from sisters.
Okay.
And didn't understand, like, oh, you live in an area and that area is assigned to a certain ward and the ward is assigned certain missionaries and it's elders in my ward.
Right.
And so one day I was driving my car. My friend, the reporter, he had told me several times, says, there are missionaries that will sit with you and answer all the questions you have. They will talk your ear off if you want them to. Like, you should talk to the missionaries. And I was always like, absolutely not. You're not kidding me. I will never be able to sit down and talk to the missionaries. I'm employed by another church. That's never happening. Right?
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
So one day I'm driving down the road and I saw 2 sister missionaries on the side of the road and they were walking and I see their name tags and I'm, speeding by and just absolutely felt God saying, like, you need to go talk to them. So I turned my car around and parked my car and got out and I kind of, I'm marching towards them. They told me later that they were really nervous that I was coming to yell at them. They're like, you were on a mission and we thought we were in trouble. So I walked up to them and I just said, like, look, I'm reading the Book of Mormon and I need somebody to help me with some questions. And they about fell over. But we started lessons. And so my lessons were always me, those 2 sister missionaries or whatever sisters came in and swapped out with them over 9 months, the 2 elders from the ward I was assigned to, often a senior missionary couple, often a person from the ward I'm assigned to, plus my friend, the reporter, joined us on Skype to join in the lessons from California.
Wow.
There was like 10 of us most weeks. So I got, I guess one way to say it is I got tons of attention from the missionaries, way more than I probably ever imagined that would happen. I love all of my missionaries. I am still in contact with most of them. They are delightful. I've gotten to those 2 girls I saw on the side of the road. I got to meet up with them about a year ago. And when I had seen them on the side of the road, we took a picture together, the 3 of us. And so when I saw them about a year ago, we recreated it. And
awesome.
It was exactly the same.
That's amazing.
So, like, I adore them. And the reality is still that it's the normal adults who are in my ward who really carried part of the heavy load of helping me, like, fully come into the church. The missionaries were great. I love all of them. But when I first started attending, we were still doing 3-hour church. So the gospel principles class was still a thing. So I was attending gospel principles with, 20 people probably from my ward who were just regular members who, for whatever reason, were in that class. Most of the time I was the only investigator and I came with a notebook of questions. And at first they were like, oh, here's the assigned lesson for today, and we're going to talk about this. And eventually I'm like, look, when are we getting to my questions? Because I've got them. And so they sat with me Sunday after Sunday after Sunday and during the week, and texts and phone calls and walks around the park and on and on and on and on and on, and absolutely supported me into the church. They were the like member missionaries that I completely needed.
My gosh, I love every part of this experience that you had, because this is truly the key to being a missionary. It's not about, it is, I mean, I shouldn't say that, but like, it really is. Every member a missionary. That used to be the go saying for a long time. Every member a missionary. And it really is true. I served a proselyting mission for 18 months down in Brazil, and it was really, I mean, it was so hard. And we'll get to that a little bit later, because that's a lot of Elder Aidukaitis' talk. But the success stories that we had as missionaries were not because of what we did with finding and teaching so much, as it was about those that were there, members of the church in that area, that took them into their lives and helped them know what it was like to be a day-to-day member of the church.
Yeah. I'll tell you the story of the very first time I visited a ward. It wasn't even my ward, wasn't even in my stake, but it's the building that's closest to my house, and it's where I knew. And I had a Sunday free from the church I was working at. And I thought, well, you're going to laugh. I'm just going to go like real casual and sneak in back and, in such a way that nobody's going to notice me. And in fact, what I told myself was, I'm going to dress just to blend in. So I'm just going to put on some jeans and a t-shirt. And I'm just going to be incognito. Nobody's even going to notice me. Well, of course, every single person in the building noticed me. And one of the women in that ward had come up to talk to me. And I, by that point, had noticed that literally everyone, including the toddlers, were better dressed than I was at that moment. And so I made a joke, because that's what I do. And she grabbed my hand and very seriously said, absolutely not. You do not feel bad about that. If you want to come back next week, you text me and I will wear jeans and we'll sit in the front together and wear jeans. I don't care. And it was just the sweetest thing.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So, like, yes, the missionaries were wonderful, but I needed experiences like that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I will speak from the missionary point of view at this point. Mm-hmm. So this was back when, like I said, I'm almost 44. So this was back when sisters would go when you were 21.
Okay.
So I was called, I put in my mission papers. This was back before the whole technology where you digitally got all your stuff. Mine's old school paper. Right. And I get this letter, and it tells me that I'm officially called as a missionary. I'm going to the Brazil Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais West Mission, which is in the state of Minas Gerais. It's like, I don't know if people know the geography of Brazil. They just see the big country down in the South America. Yeah. But if you're really curious to know, it's the state just right north of São Paulo, the state.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of in the middle. Yeah. Anyway. So there I was like panicked. I took high school Spanish, obviously didn't help because Portuguese is the language in Brazil, right? And so I went to the MTC, the training center in Provo. At the time, they had just started a new way that they were going to do it, because they had opened training centers in different parts of the world. So I was part of what was called phase training. Mm. So I know it's very fancy. I went to Provo for 5 weeks, and then they sent us down to the MTC in São Paulo.
Okay.
And I was there for 4 weeks. So there was not a scarier moment in my life, short of having my first child and them letting me take her home from the hospital without a nurse. Was I more terrified than one day when they said to all of us missionaries, they said, okay, we're going to take you out of the MTC and we're going to take you to this feira, which is like a farmer's market. Yeah. And you have to, stay with your companion and stuff, but you're just going to go out there and you're just going to learn how to chat with people. Yeah. And it was terrifying. I knew how to say a very basic prayer in Portuguese and kind of my testimony, kind of a little bit. And that was that was pretty much it. So didn't help me a lot when you're around vegetables and fruits and whatever. So truly terrifying. But anyway, to go further with this story is it really was tremendously difficult. Physically, mentally, spiritually. It was such a hard thing. But I love Elder Aidukaitis in this talk because I have to tell you, just like he did, it has truly changed my life. I literally can say that it has affected my life as far as how I met my husband, because he was my district leader at one point.
Love it.
Yes. And that obviously changed the whole trajectory of my future right there. But I have been able to look back on my life and the struggles and the hardships and things and realize, wow, I was able to really get through that because of serving my mission.
Yeah.
So you as a convert and me as a returned missionary, we are quite the pair. What did you like? What was your original, what was your takeaways from this talk regarding missionary work?
I feel like this talk, and you're right, that's the theme, in my opinion, at least of this whole conference. It's so affirming to the idea that this is not a church to, how do I say it? To kind of just like sit back and enjoy your sweet little family and never worry about anybody else. And to be honest, before I joined the church, there was part of me that kind of thought that. Like, oh, they're just stuck in their own little families and they don't actually, they're just like insular. All they care about is like the people that they're related to. That was my impression. And obviously I figured out that wasn't true. And I look back at that now and think it's kind of funny because the whole like missionary emphasis thrust of all of this is so huge. So I don't know, for me, it just massively reinforces my belief in this being a true church.
Yes, I do love that. So I have gone the rounds with even being a returned missionary. Of course, I'll admit I've been home a little, but it's been a couple of decades, just a couple of years. Yeah. A funny story about 5 years ago. We have a 12-year-old. We've been married. It'll be 20 years in June. Okay. But about 5 years ago, my husband said something to someone and he's like, yeah, I served a mission about 10 years ago. And I'm like,
nope.
You are in so much denial about how old you are. It's just sad. It's so sad. But I think now with us, we're both members of the church. And obviously this talk, I felt like, it seems to imply more towards those who are preparing to serve a full-time mission or even service missionaries, like couples and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I kind of want to go in a little bit more to what you were talking about with your experience and what you had as a investigator and a convert to the church. You did talk about how members helped you, but what were some of the ways that they did help you?
Yeah. So one of my big issues that probably took me the longest amount of time to get over was I was really distrustful of the idea of having a prophet. Everything I had learned in evangelical Christianity was against that. And my own personal experience of religious men who had abused their power made me really, really skeptical of that. And so for a couple of probably 6 or 8 weeks, to be honest, we had been kind of mulling over that in the gospel principles class when the missionaries came to me and said, oh, we just learned that President Nelson is going to come to Safeco Field, the baseball field, and do a talk for the people of Seattle. And we're going to get you tickets so that you can go. Well, fantastic. I've been wondering about this prophet man. Let's go see him. And, it was, there's 40,000 people there. I had intended to find the missionaries and sit with them, and I never did, but I sat with some friends and I'd gotten there early. And more than learning the doctrine of why a prophet matters and why we need one, that didn't really, all those weeks did not move anything in me. But when I sat for an hour at the baseball stadium waiting for these talks to begin, everyone all around me, they were talking about the prophet that was their prophet. usually the one from when they were young or whatever, or like their favorite thing that a prophet had ever said and how it had impacted. Like the entire place is talking about this stuff. And it was so beautifully like non-cynical. It was just faith, right? And I was coming at it from such a cynical point of view of like, oh yeah, he's the prophet. Like what nonsense is he up to on the side? Like that's really what I thought. And to hear all of these people, like real adults my age, talking about how having a prophet has impacted them, it totally squared away that issue for me, like in that hour.
Wow. How did you feel being in the same stadium as him? I mean, I know you also went to conference, but
it was interesting. He's obviously impressive as a human being. I don't know that anything he said or presented that was really like, oh, that makes me believe. It was the people I sat with and the people all around us that helped my faith grow more than he himself did. I don't know what that says about me. But he's a delight to listen to, extremely effective at communicating. Like I appreciated all of those things, but it was the ways in which normal people relate to having a prophet in this faith-filled, non-cynical kind of way.
I think that's a really cool way to see it, because I have had an experience where I've been in the same room as a prophet a couple of times, and I've had a different experience. I love your experience where the faith of those around you kind of helped you start to develop faith. Mm-hmm. And that is so cool about missionary work, because I love that. And I love how you had such a positive experience about members of the church pretty much just bringing you into their fold and taking care of you. Because that really is the key. I think for each and every one of us as members of the church is we need to love people into the gospel, and be there for them. Like I have a neighbor next door, and she's so darling. She's so darling. She's from another faith, but as soon as we moved into this ward, she was just our ward. As soon as we moved into this neighborhood, she was like, "Oh, welcome. We're so excited to have you." And just so sweet. Brought us over. We moved because we're crazy. We moved into this house like 2 weeks before Christmas.
Oh, wow.
It was nuts. Brought us a little thing of, Christmas treats, and just so sweet. Friended me on Facebook, put me on the Facebook neighborhood page. And I live in the South. I live in Tennessee. We have tons and tons of churches here. And I am ashamed to say this, but I will, because now I need to own it. I have been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints my entire life, and I have not outwardly been as Christian as these Christian people have shown me. Mm-hmm. They live what they believe, and very valiantly and very loudly sometimes.
Yeah.
And yes, there's moments where it's like in your face, but I admire the boldness. Mm-hmm. I admire the just solid belief that of what they have is so precious to them. And I am so grateful that I get to live next door to an amazing friend who is not of my faith. She invites me to her church stuff. I invite her to my church stuff. We go back and forth. And it's just amazing. It's an amazing experience. And so I'm grateful for that perspective. And I'm grateful for what you shared, because I think, and I hope people who listen to this podcast realize how truly valuable they are to those around them.
Yeah. It makes me think of one of the women who was in the Gospel Principles class with me. She's still a very good friend of mine. Her name is Bethany. And Bethany is as sweet and mild-mannered as you can imagine. Blonde and adorable and a mom of 7 and just a cupcake, right? And there was one day in our lesson where we're talking about the 3 degrees of glory. And I was like, I don't want to end up at the bottom. That sounds terrible. And sweet Bethany, in like an unusually bold move, she just kind of leans forward and says, well, then don't. right? Like
wow.
he is as kind and like loving and gentle as possible. And that was an incredibly bold thing for her to say. Like, you don't want to go there? Then don't, right?
Wow.
Like figure it out, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And I've teased her about it a few times since then, because it's probably the boldest thing I've ever heard her say. And she's got 7 kids she has to yell after, right? Like,
oh my gosh.
But I needed that kind of clarity. Or like, even when my friend, the reporter, says like, I have scriptures you don't have, that caught my attention.
Yeah.
Right. He could have just said, well, you know, I don't know, I've got different beliefs about Moses. And I would have been like, oh, that's cool. Right. But to make a bold declaration, coming from a point of, it's very compelling.
That's so amazing. And I don't know if you've asked them or they've said it, but did they, after, like, maybe if you brought it up to them, like, what you said to me really affected me, did they say they felt prompted to say it, or was it just something that they just were like, I just got to say this?
You know, the feedback that I got from several people was, I mean, I look now and laugh because I'm friends with all of these folks, but at the time they were feeling, I don't know if intimidated is the right word.
Okay.
But like, I have an advanced degree in theology. I can read Greek and Hebrew. I've studied the Bible my entire life. I have 60 chapters of the Bible memorized. I've spent my entire life loving and reading and studying the Bible, right? So the feedback they have given me was like, we were kind of afraid we were going to say something that was absolutely offensive or wrong to you. So we were just winging it and doing the very best we could and trying to stay close to the Spirit. And really, that's what they were doing. The knowledge that I brought to the table in some ways was a barrier to me getting it. It you know, I've helped the missionaries teach lessons to people and been able to be at the baptisms of people that we have taught since then. And many of those folks who come from far less church or Bible background than I did, they had it easier. Mine was hard, and I get it that it was kind of intimidating to some. I don't think of myself as an intimidating person by any means, but I get what they're saying.
Right.
And they had to express a lot of faith to be able to speak plainly and clearly and boldly in the way that they did.
Wow, that's amazing. On a personal note, at the beginning of the year, because we're studying in church in the Come Follow Me, we're studying the Old Testament, which you're probably just dancing circles around. I just thought, you know what? I have never read the Old Testament all the way through, like cover to cover.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do it. Gosh darn it. And so I have been, and I got to tell you, there are some days where, because I figured I read 3 chapters a day. I'll be done by the end of the year. So I will admit to you, Jennifer, because I feel like we're besties now, I will like read a chapter and be like, okay, I know what's going on. Like, I know what's happening here. I kind of pick up. And then there's chapters where I read it. I'm like, I have no idea what just happened.
Yeah.
I literally do. And so I might have to, stalk you on Facebook every once in a while now with, hey, especially with your Hebrew insight here, what is happening?
Can't follow the story here.
What is going on?
It's been so fun for me to bring kind of my past perspective on the Old Testament and have it be in conversation with some new perspectives. It's been a fun year for me, and I'm looking forward to New Testament year next year too for the same reason.
Oh yeah. See, I love the New Testament. I'm like, I've done that one.
Yeah.
And I'm geared up. I've been, how do I put it? I've been really, kind of cheering myself on for when I hit Isaiah. I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit Isaiah. It's going to be awesome.
When I figured, so I didn't know that there were chapters of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. That was news to me the first time I read it. And when I read that was actually a really pivotal moment for me.
Really?
Because I had been so trained and so taught to say the Bible is the only scripture that exists. Anything else that claims to be scripture is not. And so when I found Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, I went, oh, this is fascinating. If I'm going to say that Isaiah is true when it's between the covers of the Bible, I also have to say it's true if it's between the covers of the Book of Mormon. right? Like I can't say it's true here and it's false here.
Wow.
And so when I am probably the only person I know, but I love that Isaiah is in the Book of Mormon. I love all of the Isaiah chapters. I'm a huge geek. You hit me up and we will talk about it.
Oh, my friend, we will, because I'm like, I've got to get it this time through. I've studied Isaiah. I've read through it a bunch of times, but again, I use like Institute manuals, and I also, just to give a shout out to the virtual Jewish library. They have virtual Jewish library. That's been very helpful to me for my Old Testament, by the way.
Good.
Yeah. Cause I'm like, they know what's going on. For me, I love how we're diverting and totally going into Old Testament right now, but just one more second of this, because I just love how, I think probably my main but my issue with understanding the Old Testament is it's because it's so old and the customs are different and the culture and yeah.
It also, in comparison to the Book of Mormon, you do not ever have to go more than 3 chapters in the Book of Mormon before you find something that's very soul nourishing.
Right.
But the Old Testament will make you go 200 pages sometimes.
Yes.
Before you get a gem. And that's a long trek.
I've found those valleys.
Yes. And there's more coming.
And I'm sure there are more coming. I'm in Ezra. Oh no, I just finished Ezra. So
nice. Nehemiah's up next.
Yeah. So, but I've appreciated it. One thing that I've really loved about it is, back in that time, it was where the rubber meets the road kind of way of living. You commit adultery, you die.
Yep.
You steal, you get your head cut off. Like, it was very, and nowadays, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of, what was the word? Just we've been someone in my institute class said we've been marginalizing God. And I think that's kind of the way that I like to put it, is like, we're really kind of putting it out in the margins there, what's really important, the commandments.
Yeah. Nobody's preaching from Ezra these days. Right?
No, they're not. Yeah. And Ezra is actually not too hard to understand. It's before and after so far. But no, so anyway, but I know we kind of got off on a little tangent about the Old Testament. That was my bad, but I did want to pick your brain a little bit about that inadvertently. But I do love all of this, because I think members of the church who are hopefully listening to this podcast, they're realizing, as I am realizing, how truly important we are, by our examples, our influence, our friendships with others. Matthew Watkins and I have to give him a shout out. He's another host on this podcast group that we have going. He and I have talked about this so many times, about how members of the church sometimes feel like they have to create a new program or a new mission or goal or something. And really, missionary work it's like wearing the same hat. It's all part of being a member of the church. It's just be who you are. And a previous podcast I had been in, I remarked, I can't remember who the talk was now because it's late, but he is a member of the 70, and he went up to a guy at the airport in customs to show his passport. And he legit just was like, so what are your thoughts about God?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I just thought that was amazing. And what's even more amazing is the man thoughtfully responded to him.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know if I had served a mission. I wore the name tag. I knocked on a lot of doors. Brazilians are very friendly, nice people. We did have some people that were pretty rude. Mm-hmm. Sister missionaries were kind of lucky. They're not as rude to the women as they are to the men. But there were many times, their most favorite thing to do would be, oh, sure, come back. And then they just wouldn't be home. Yeah. So we got ghosted a lot. But I just love that, how just so nice he was, and just said, what are your thoughts about God? And it led to this amazing conversation. Anyway, I'm kind of going off, but I just love that. Was there anything else in this talk specifically from Elder Aidukaitis that you love, that you want to bring up?
No, not that I can think of specifically. Do you have any specific part you loved that we haven't gone over yet?
The funny part I liked was he was talking kind of at the beginning about the struggles he was going through to go on a mission. He had a lot of some opposition. First, It was from his dentist, which I thought was hilarious. And then he said his university was kind of giving him a hard time that he wouldn't be able to go back. And then he met a girl that he was really interested in. And so then he goes on to talk about how much he had learned about his mission and what it really helped him and how it was instrumental. And he said, in my preparation for adult life, including possible marriage and parenthood, church service, and professional and community life, which I learned that. And specifically now, I'm going back to school for my bachelor's degree now, finally, after a million years. And that has helped me. The mission has helped me with that, which is amazing. I'm like, I'm not a quitter. I'm going to get straight A's and I'm going to do what I can. And that's kind of the attitude I had as a missionary.
If you just think about the missionary program from a psychological point of view, there is nothing better for those young kids' development than to be given responsibility, to be trusted with a pretty heavy load. And the expectation is they're going to be able to do it. Like the amount of growing up that they do in those 18 months or 2 years, you don't find that replicated in university students, in kids who are working, and kids who joined the military. It's phenomenal just in terms of young adult development.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about like where would I have been if I had not served a mission, or what kind of person. People don't believe me when I say that I was pretty reserved when I was younger because I'm a talker. But I really was, and I had a really hard time, and the mission really kind of opened me up. And it was really hard, but it was literally like a life within a life.
Yeah.
You have this really condensed time where you're kind of put through the refiner's fire, but you're so happy.
Yeah.
I was so happy the whole time because I wasn't thinking about me. I wasn't thinking about what I need to be doing. I was just thinking about God. And I hope people that are listening to this that are considering serving a mission, it just was such a truly happy time. And I'm in communication with a missionary who served here in one of the wards I was in. And we've been Facebook messaging back and forth, and she's been home for a few months and she's having a hard time.
Yeah.
Because, that whole 18 months was just, I love the Lord. I get to serve. I get to always be serving people. And now she's home and she's got to think about herself.
Yeah.
The
psychological research supports that too. Every bit of psychological research we have on young adults says if you give them high expectations and high support, that is what produces the happiness, the happiest version of them. Low expectations, low support is the worst. Low expectations, high support makes them feel babied and like they're infants. High expectations that give them something to reach for with appropriate safety nets and support as needed. That's what produces good outcomes.
That's so good to know. Very quickly before we're getting to the end here, but I was at our stake conference recently, and the adult session where they just have all the adults to listen in or participate. For our stake, they were just talking about the sad lowering rates of the seminary students. And so they were kind of bringing that up, and they were the reason I'm bringing it up is because the speaker who was talking about this in the presidency, he said, what can we do? What can we do to help our kids, help them be, to go to seminary, to continue to achieve these goals that we hope that they have for themselves. And that really gave me pause because I don't have a high school kid yet. I don't have a kid in seminary yet. But I thought about that. I went, oh my goodness, I can be an influence to the seminary kids now. Yeah. And so I think that's also something to think about is that we can, it doesn't matter, if you've served a mission, if you're a convert, if you're new or whatever, you can be an influence to those around you.
Yeah.
And I think generally speaking for all general conference with missionary work being the theme, I really felt like that's what they're saying to all of us. It's like, okay, so you and I both right now, we cannot go out and serve a proselyting mission. However, we can help those that can. Yeah. We can be that support. And I just love that. A final thought as I was saying earlier, that I love so much about him talking about the opposition he had faced. I love what he says kind of at the end of his talk. He kind of gives, the resolution to it. And he said, God truly blessed me. Remember the challenges that I thought I faced prior to my mission? My dentist, I found another. My university, they made an exception for me. Remember that young woman? She married one of my good friends. I'm pretty sure he laughed at that part, so you really do have to hear his laugh. It's so fantastic. But I love how he said that after his mission, he benefited from increased courage to present himself as a faithful follower of Jesus Christ and his church in all circumstances and to all people, even sharing the gospel with a beautiful woman who had become his virtuous, wise, fun, and beloved eternal companion.
Yeah.
So the thing I love so much about that part is, and I know this to be true, is that Heavenly Father does so much more for our lives than we can do for ourselves. And if we dedicate a small portion of our time, of our life, he'll make it so much better than it was.
Yeah.
I don't know where I would have been if I had not served a mission. I definitely wouldn't have been bilingual because I'm lazy by nature. So I know that for sure. And I met a really great man and married him. I don't know what it would have been like if not. So who knows about that? But missions are amazing. And yes, they're hard, but you know what? There are a lot of hard things in life and they're all worth it.
That's right. I love that.
Yeah. I just feel like also nowadays, like if something's hard, people just kind of are like, don't want to do that.
Yep.
But yeah. Anyway, do you have any final thoughts or anything? We talked and I just loved this.
I am just so grateful for the missionaries that have been in my life, the members who still carry me along with my questions and my incessant whatever. I wish I would have made this choice to join this church decades ago. That's my only regret, is that I didn't do this when I was a lot younger. And it didn't work out that way. And that is how it is. And just so grateful that it was able to work out as it did.
Well, speaking as one who has served a mission, I can tell you right now, if a person like you came up to me and asked me about reading a book that had more of Moses, or essentially chased me down the street as a missionary and wanting to know more, it would make me nervous at first. I can totally understand. But I would be just like blown away. And I bet you that all of these missionaries that have been involved with you, they went home and they have been talking about Jennifer Roach as their...
Isn't that hysterical? I think it's so funny.
I bet you they do, because it's just such an inspiring story. It's so amazing to me that, I don't know, the Lord knows you and he loves you and he knows how to get to you.
Yeah.
And even though I know you wanted it earlier in your life, the fact of how it came to be, and so beautiful, and such a traumatic time of your life. I mean, a lawsuit and change of your job and your lifestyle. And I mean, I know there's a lot of sacrifice there, but that the Lord reached out to you at that time and you were able to recognize that. That blows my mind. That's so beautiful.
It's been lovely.
Oh, I love that so much. Okay, well, again, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. This was so amazing.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Conference Talk podcast, where we discussed Elder Kearon's and Elder Aidukaitis' addresses. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating. You can find us on iTunes and Spotify, YouTube, Google, Stitcher, Amazon, Audible, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Facebook, and everywhere you get podcasts. You can find links to all of our platforms on our website, conferencetalk.org. And you know what else is at conferencetalk.org? Everything. Go there to follow us on social media, drop us a comment, check out the show notes, find related talks, or learn more about us, your hosts. A big thanks to Jennifer Roach for hopping on mics with me today. You can follow her. We've talked about this. She and I have something in common. We're on the interwebs. We are on Facebook. You can friend us.
Friend us.
So find her on Facebook. And me as well. You can follow me on Conference Talk, because I'm here, And also on Facebook as well. I have a very unique last name, so I'm sure you'll find me. We do always appreciate new followers, but it's even better to follow the prophet and the apostles themselves. So we love speaking about the church and our leaders, but we also do not speak for them. Everything said in this podcast represents our own personal opinions. So join us next week for another episode of the Conference Talk podcast.